guess we'll just get going with it. This is, I lied a little bit in the chat. I said we'd be explaining amusement parks. That's a portion of it. But in actuality, when it comes to cybersecurity, we're talking about Kerberos, which is the authentication protocol used by default in Windows domains, specifically Active Directory. So if you've heard Active Directory before, Active Directory is this like big overarching name for a whole bunch of different protocols and processes that are all bound up together, and Microsoft calls them Active Directory. It involves like user domains, authentication, access to services, all sorts of stuff. So we're going to talk about one part of that, which is Kerberos.
Question.
Yeah.
I was sent here for patches,
That patch dude's not here.
so.
No chance. I don't know where John is. Did John tell you to come?
Yeah, here at 6 today for the second place patches or whatever.
Yeah, we don't have.
Where is John?
I have the third place one.
What?
I said I have the third place one.
You have the third place? Well, we signed up for the second Wolfe place ones. That's tough.
We signed up.
Wait. I don't know, somehow we got second place. I don't know how.
You're just going
We just made our way there.
Well, no. There was still someone that got first place.
I was sick. So.
Okay, so you sent him a message?
I said, where the hell are you?
I was sick.
I sent him a dude wants his patches.
Yeah.
Dude wants his patch.
If you want to spend like 5 minutes or something, or if you want to stay the whole time.
If John said he's going to be here, I imagine he'd be here. But, yeah, up to you.
I'll wait 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's about as much as I can stay.
It's going to be a great one. But yeah, so we're going to talk about Kerberos specifically.
Otherwise, we can figure out some way to get them to you.
We can email them too, as an NFT.
Okay.
NFT.
We'll mint them as an NFT and then mail it. They actually be more valuable in the past. Yeah, so the little disclaimer, asterisk for the presentation, this is last minute as hell. Started this slide deck yesterday. I haven't run through it. I don't know how long it's going to take. Could be done in 20 minutes. Definitely won't go over an hour. And I'm really banking on you guys asking questions because, like, I need to share up my understanding of this as much as you guys want to learn about it. So hopefully we can all benefit from the presentation. But the first and most important question that I was hoping John would be for here when I asked it is, what is Kerberos like? Does anybody want to guess? Not this side of the room because I yelled at everybody else and I put it in Slack today.
Oh, like an amusement park?
Oh my god! It is
John
exactly.
just said oof, so it's not looking promising. If you want to go.
So Kerberos is exactly
If he gets,
like an amusement.
are you in the Slack by chance?
For 2:30?
Nope.
Or Wolfe? I don't even know. I don't even know.
I don't.
No, well, we'll figure out some other time.
I was gonna say, like,
Yeah.
you can probably just, in the IASG Slack, let someone know
Or if you're in 2:30.
that.
You're in my Tuesday lab, right? Or
Yeah,
Thursday?
Tuesday, tomorrow.
I'm gonna see John. Probably.
If John shows up at all, we'll get him to you.
Yeah.
well,
yeah.
Figure it
I
out.
mean, there's also 3 other people in my group that you can talk to.
That's true.
Yeah.
So,
We'll
all
figure
right,
it out.
see ya.
Okay, so. It is exactly like an amusement park. I have said this to everybody like a number of times, and anytime Kerberos comes up, I say it like this.
Train.
What?
I thought it was like a train, that's how you describe it. Not at all.
Yeah. So it's like an amusement park, and we'll get into the analogy a little bit, but to preface this definition, I always say it's like an amusement park because I was taught this analogy from a class I took at the SAMS Technological Institute over the summer. That one covered Kerberos a bit more in depth, and the definition that stuck with me was this analogy to an amusement park. Super awesome, and to give it even more reason for you to think about it like this, on my last 2 big technical interviews for positions this summer, I have been asked specific pointed questions about Kerberos because it's so used in the industry, and it's so often a medium for exploitation, specifically like lateral movement inside of a Windows network or privilege escalation. So this stuff is definitely important to know. The 2 questions I was asked was, one of them is, how would you describe Kerberos to somebody who doesn't know what Kerberos is? And I literally, I was on a phone call in my room with my earbuds in, and it was just a phone call, so I'm like, okay, cool. And I was like, I know this, I can do this, I know this analogy. I stood up and I just paced back and forth in my room, rambling with this this guy about how much it was like an amusement park. And then I got to the end and he's like, I love that analogy, dude. That is such an effective one. I've heard it a couple of times, but I'm glad it's getting taught, so definitely cool. Nick.
What problem does this solve?
The problem Kerberos aims to solve is having like authentication and reputability inside of a Windows domain. So we need to be able to, inside of a Windows domain, you're going to have like a bunch of computers and a bunch of services generally. So you would have you know, a bunch of users trying to access different things, and then the services would be down here, and they could be anything from file shares to you know, web servers or printers or anything. So we need a way to make sure that each of these people on the network has an identity. They are who they say they are. We need to make sure that they have the right access to do these things. So can A access this, but not this? How do we know that? And we need to make sure that if any of these things happen, so if a user, you know, A, B, and C, access B, E, and F, if any of these users do things, we need to make sure that we have accounts of those. We need to make sure that people are staying accountable, so that if there's somebody doing bullshit activity, we can tie that back to one specific account. So that's the general, the gist of what Kerberos is and why we need it. It also reminds me I was going to get, in case anybody here is, well, if any of you are cyber majors or minors, you will take 331 with Julie. And a good portion of, a couple of her lectures are dedicated to Kerberos. So I might have my notes up, just as reference in case there's any super specific questions about like the tech stuff, because we're gonna mostly go over some of the more high level things, so that I've never been asked a question on an interview where it was like, specifically tell me like this one like really fine detail about Kerberos' implementation in Windows like 10 or 9, or no wait, not 9 was like 8 point whatever. So we're gonna manage on just sticking with the kind of overview, but so yeah. Enough on this slide. It's like an amusement park. Let's figure out why. And psych, before we do that, vocab quiz. I went back and forth on whether I should put the analogy diagram stuff before the vocab or the vocab first. I found out there's really no good way to walk through this diagram without hitting you with the vocab first. So we're going to try to run through these. There are a lot of acronyms, but they are, and a lot of times people use them as buzzwords and they come up a ton, but they come up because they're really important. So I also have a little diagram here I put together for some of these, to visualize some of these things. So the most basic thing we can talk about is a domain controller in a network. So a domain controller, we're going to talk about like the most basic setup for a Windows domain. A domain controller is going to refer to this big, like, it's usually one server that hosts two separate things. It hosts the Active Directory server that will maintain a database of valid users and all of their information and credentials. And then it will also host the KDC, or the Key Distribution Center, or service, Key Distribution Service. And that will be responsible for some of the tickets and keys that we hand out to users on our network. So domain controller just refers to this big overarching server. It can do a ton. It's super important and like one of the first things you set up in a Windows domain. So the Active Directory part is pretty self-explanatory. That's usually just like a list of users, like a database for checking who's allowed on the network. The KDC is a little bit more interesting. The KDC again gets broken up into two parts. So it has the AS and the TGS. The AS is going to be the authentication server. Pretty straightforward again. It's just taking in credentials and responsible for turning those credentials into TGTs, or ticket granting tickets, something we'll talk about in a second. And then the TGS is responsible for taking in those TGTs that the authentication server generates and turning them into TGSs, or sometimes they're referred to as just session tickets. So again, this is why it gets a little hard, because everything's really intertwined and you can't really explain one part of it without talking about the other parts. So we're just going to go kind of out of order here. But so that's the AS and the TGS. The other two things, and the most common words you'll hear, are ticket granting tickets, or TGT, and a TGS, which can be a ticket granting service. It's a little confusing because it also refers to the server inside of the KDC. But sometimes what people will say, you get a TGT and a TGS are your two forms of authentication inside of a domain. We'll probably just refer to it as a ticket. So a TGT is the ticket granting ticket, and then you use that to generate tickets, which are more fine detailed access. So TGT is your like it's like your passport inside of a Windows domain. So that's going to be, you trade your authentication, you trade your credentials. So if you had your domain controller and you came onto the network, you would send your domain controller your username and password. Let's say that's all you need to log on. It would take the username and password, throw it into the authentication server. Authentication server would check if those are valid credentials against the domain, the Active Directory server itself, or the database of users. And if it finds that it's valid and you're good to log in, it will send you a ticket granting ticket. So inside of the domain, though, we use our ticket granting ticket to talk to everything. And then that ticket granting ticket can be exchanged for ticket granting services or actual tickets that you would run. So these are things, yes?
Is there a reason it's KDC instead of KDS?
Oh, balls. I might have wrote that down wrong. Let me see if I wrote that down wrong, or I think it's key distribution center. So it's not surprising. See, that's where it gets a little confusing because that's KDC, and then there's the TGS and the TGS, which is two versions. So that's it's key distribution center. So this might not make a ton of sense now, but I'm gonna tie it in with the analogy I'm gonna do, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense because I just wanted to get these out here so that I'm not using those words and it means nothing. So we'll probably hop back to the slide, but let's go into that analogy I was talking about, the amusement park. So you're thinking, yeah, right, how is this like an amusement park? I mean, you're saying a bunch of stuff about tickets and like all these weird servers and stuff, and I've been to a lot of amusement parks, and I've never seen a server, let alone one that I'm giving username or password to. So let's walk through this. We're gonna go, and you're Johnny Sticks over here, and you want to access the the Windows domain, the Six Flags branch of Windows domain or something. So this is like you coming up to the amusement park, and you're at the gates, and you're like, hey, I need to get into that amusement park. It looks great. I see all those rides. I need to get in there. So you go up to the ticket booth, and in real life, you would say, oh, hey, here's my money or whatever. I'm like this old, or I don't even know if you need to be old to get into an amusement park, but you would give them some form of payment and some authentication criteria, something that they would take to allow you into the park. So in real life, let's just say you pay them $10 or whatever. I don't know how much it costs to go to the park. In our domain, or in our Windows domain, for an analogy, this would be the user logging or booting up their computer and logging into the domain controller. So I don't know how well you can read that. Can't read it great, but that is the domain controller, parentheses, the KDC, so the key distribution center. So that's going to be what takes in, or I guess even more specifically would be the authentication server, because that's going to be what takes in your username and password. So we see that our user will send their creds to this ticket booth, this main ticket booth that's the gatekeeper of the rest of the amusement park. And if those creds are valid and everything, that amusement park thing is going to send back a TGT. So now we have successfully traded our credentials for a ticket granting ticket. We're into the park, we're looking good. Gates are open, we can see all these awesome rides for ourselves. One ride that catches our eye specifically is the file server go-round. Oh my god, this thing has been hyped to oblivion. So, obviously you get in the park and that's the first thing you're going to want to ride. You're going to see that standing up there and you're like, yes, for me. So you're like, okay, what do I need to do? You walk up to the file server go-round and you're like, hey, I got this ticket granting ticket, I'm in the park already, let me ride the ride. And the operator of that thing is going to be very confused and say, no, dude, you obviously don't know how this park works. You need to take that ticket, which got you into the park, you need to go trade that in actually for a different ticket, and that ticket is specifically for my ride. So I can't let you on the ride until I know that you meet the minimum height requirements, you don't have any heart conditions or whatever, all these things that we need to check to let you on the ride. You need to go get a separate ticket that says you're good to do all those. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to that KDC, and now we're going to be talking to the other half of it, which is the TGS, the ticket granting service. We're going to talk to that and say, hey, I was just over at that file server ride, and they told me to come back and talk to you and try to figure out what I need to get on there, so what can I do to get there? So Johnny Sticks, after he gets in the amusement park, is going to send his ticket granting ticket to prove that it's him, along with the SPN of the service that they want to access, or the ride they want to ride. So an SPN is going to be like a unique name that identifies that one service in the domain. So it's going to send its ticket granting ticket and the specific name of the ride it wants to ride. It says, hey, I'm this person, ticket granting ticket. I want to ride the file server. the KDC, or the domain controller, is gonna check that ticket. It's gonna be like, hey, you look good, you're tall enough, you're of a stable heart rate, you know, whatever you need to, and it's going to give you back a TGS, or a ticket granting service, or just a session ticket. So this one ticket now is a much more specific form of authentication that is actually a valid session for the file server ride specifically. So now we're going to be presenting this to the file server. So if we take that TGS, or that ticket, we're going to send that ticket along to the file server ride. So now that we got back, we go back over to the dude who threw us out before. We say, hey, I figured out the system here. This TGS should give me access to your specific ride. They take it, do some magic with it, and they say, boom, you are good to go, looks good, and now you're on the ride. Now you're rolling, you're having fun. Yes?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
How do we do this thing?
How do we do it?
Yeah.
Like just like technically, or like, so I have another slide coming up that will talk a little bit more about the technical aspects, but it's a lot of password hashes and keys for encrypting things to make sure that we know who's who, because yeah, it's just very, it all works together, but it's pretty confusing when it comes to the fine details between TGTs and TGSs. But in general, if I've explained this analogy correctly, we have a user, they talk to one central authentication server, they get their valid form of authentication in TGT, they then want to access a service, like a file server, they exchange that TGT for a more specific TGS, and then use that to authenticate. So the beauty of this system is that when the file server gets that TGS, that very specific ticket, they know a lot about the user giving it to them already. Because they trust the TGTs and they trust the server that's handing them out, just by that one ticket, the file server knows that that user belongs in the network because they couldn't get the ticket if they didn't already have a TGT. So obviously they're supposed to be here already. They, I'm trying to remember if there's any checks. The checks for permissions are done there, so it knows that it already has access to it. All it needs to do is validate that the ticket's legit and hasn't been forged. So those are a couple things that the file server does, but overall it's just a lot of trust, and hopefully these next couple of slides will get a little bit more specific about the technical implementation of it, because this is like the high level, you know, general idea of it.
When you say magic, the checking, is that going to be public-private key type stuff, or does it actually talk with the domain controller?
So I have another, yeah, I'll double check that in the next slide that I have, which is a more like grounded diagram of this that I didn't make, because I made this one if you couldn't tell. I was literally Googling this and doing research on it right before I came here, because Kerberos itself is founded on symmetric key encryption. So there's no private public key pairing. But there were a lot of things that were saying, so the way that I understand it is that the Active Directory, or the KDC, is seen as the unfaltering source of truth in the network. So it holds the password hashes of every user, as well as every service account, which is responsible for running these rides. So that'd be like the ride operator. Because it holds all of those, it usually just encrypts things or signs them with that account's password hash. So like a TGT is signed with the password hash of this very specific service account inside of it. It's like KRB TGT is the name of the service account. That one has a password, and that hash is used to sign TGTs. Then they're encrypted with the user that's requesting those password hash. So I think it's all based on symmetric keys, but the Active Directory server has all of the public keys, so whenever it needs to double check or authenticate something, it usually asks the domain controller for it. So let me see, yeah, so that's it for this high level analogy, and now hopefully we'll get a little bit more detailed about some of the more mechanical stuff, but this is a much more professional diagram that I did not make, that has the specific names for all the requests. So to walk through this, we have the client. So this is our stick figure trying to get access to the network, trying to get access to those rides specifically. When we first get presented, it goes to the KDC, the domain controller, and it says, hey, I need a TGT. So this first outside red line is sending the username and password to the authentication server, saying, hey, can I get a TGT? The second red line is coming back saying, yes, you can. You're in the database, you're good to go, here's a TGT. The inside blue one is then requesting that TGS for a specific service. So our client has now decided, after they've logged in, they decided that they want to access this application server. So they get the SPN for it, which is like the name of the server, and they say, hey, here's my TGT, can I get access to this one specific ride? It sends back its TGS for that ride, and after it gets the TGS, the client can then send the TGS to the application server, and then that back validation is what we were talking about a little bit. So the TGS is signed with the key for, or the TGS is encrypted with the password hash of this client. So, okay, put a pin in that. So now we've got our TGS presented back. We're going to talk a little bit about how these tickets work specifically, because you know, it's easy to say magic, but it is also important to know some of the technical details. Like the first question I was asked on the interview was that, walk me through this analogy, which now if like you had to, so you put a gun to your head right now, hopefully you'd be able to walk through it a little bit because we just explained it. I don't know if you will in a day or whatever, but that part was okay. The second part that I got for that question was a bit more technical, so I guess the best place to start for this conversation would be, who knows about, I guess we'll skip asymmetric, symmetric encryption. So having like one key, and then you encrypt that with that, but you encrypt a chunk of data with this one key, and then you would share that key with somebody else. They would get the encrypted data, and then unencrypt it with the same key. Does that sound familiar to people as a concept? So there's symmetric and asymmetric. Asym being that you would have two different keys, one for encrypting it, and one for decrypting it. You'd have two separate keys. This would be a private key and a public key, that sort of thing. It's super common on the internet for setting up TLS or SSL sessions. And symmetric is a little bit older, but this is just one key for encrypting and decrypting. So we would take in our data, put it through here, get out a bunch of unreadable garbage, and then whenever somebody wanted to read that, they would need to have this exact key again to take that data and change it back into the, or take this encrypted mess that is not readable or valid in any sense, and turn it back into valid data. So this, as far as I know, and this is where we were going to get a little foggy, Kerberos is founded on the principle of symmetric key encryption. Asymmetric is pretty hard to manage because there are like a ridiculous number of keys. You know, for each like connection, you're going to need at least two keys, sometimes more for multiple sessions with one user. So the number of keys that the Active Directory server would need to manage in this is like astronomical to the number of users. So Kerberos is founded and uses symmetric key encryption. And the biggest issue with symmetric key is how do we share this encrypted key? Because if we just like, if we have two clients and they want to talk encrypted to each other, we can't have one client say, hey, A, I want to talk to B, I'm A, here's a key, use this key from here going forward to encrypt all of our traffic. Because if somebody was listening, they would just grab the key and then you can just decrypt all the traffic, so you might as well not have encrypted it. So the biggest issue in a symmetric system is how do we share this key? How can we get that to both A and B without anybody else getting access to it? And there's a lot of crazy solutions to that in the real world, but in Windows land, the solution to this is to have this domain controller, have that server, have all of the keys. So anytime you want to access it, this client says, hey, I need that key, give me it. And then the web application server says, hey, I also need that key, give me that one. And the best way to do that is to have these keys be the password hashes of all the accounts and with computers on the network. So I guess that brings up another point, hashing. Who's heard of hashing? Gets a general idea of how it works. Yeah, so hashing is a little bit different than this, where hashing would take in a arbitrarily long amount of data. You can have any length of data you want. You pass it into this one-way hashing function. So all this data goes in, this is our hash function, and out pops a very specific fixed length output. So it can be like 32 bytes or 128. So any amount of data goes in, a set amount of data comes out, but this data is a couple key characteristics of a hashing function is that it has to be one way. So there's no way to go from this data, this hash is what it's called. There's no way to go from this hash back to the original data. And if you change one byte in this input, if you make, instead of data, you make it data with a B, that completely changes everything about this. There's absolutely no correlation between the input and the output data. And that's how we can store passwords without actually storing passwords. Because if you want to store a database that has a bunch of user passwords, well, if somebody gets access to that database, now they just have all the passwords. It's better to store them like this, so that if you access the database, you have all these hashes, and there's no possible way for you to go, in one step, go back to this data. The only way you can do it is by brute forcing it, where if you know the hashing algorithm, you can put in, you put data A, check, it's not correct. Data B, check, oh, it's correct. So that's how you go about cracking a hash and all that. But so basically, all that to say, the keys, the symmetric keys that are used in Windows domains are the password hashes of the users and accounts that are on that domain. And we can access them by querying the domain controller. So, Nick, to answer your question when it comes to validating that, the magic stuff, so the client has a TGS. That TGS is encrypted with its client's user, or what's it called? Its client's password hash. When the application server gets it, it can check with the domain controller and say, hey, is this, can you check for me and tell me if this is this user's TGS? Either the application server itself or the KDC will decrypt it and then say, yeah, it decrypted correctly, therefore we know that this user is valid, this is their thing. So the domain controller and the KDC kind of act as the central key sharing for all of the encryptions that go along. And a bunch of this stuff is also encrypted. When we send our credentials, we get back a TGT. That TGT is encrypted by the password hash of the root user account on this server. So the ultimate password hash is used to encrypt that TGT, so that the only account that can ever look inside of it is the domain controller itself. So that's a key thing. Again, a lot of encryption stuff, because another thing that happens inside of here is signing. Things can be signed instead of encrypted. Show of hands, who knows what signing is when it comes to data? As I say, probably a little less. That one's probably not as common as the others, but when you sign data, you're just proving that that you created that data. So it's a interesting encryption method for saying, yes, this data is not only produced by me, but we know it hasn't been changed in the process. And it has to do with, it combines both hashing and encryptions, where it hashes the message into this set length, and then it signs that hash, or encrypts that hash with a key, and then you can decrypt it and check the hashes match, and then you know nothing's changed. But so, all that to say, I think the key takeaways here, if we're not trying to get too in the weeds about crypto, so TGTs are TGTs are encrypted with the password hash of the super user root account that everybody wants. So it's encrypted with it. The TGSs, on the other hand, are signed with the password hashes of the application server's password hash. So TGTs are super powerful, and I'll get a little bit into what I talk about later when it comes to attacks and some common words when you come to attacking this sort of stuff. TGTs are signed or are encrypted with the password hash of the super account, and the TGSs are signed, not encrypted, with the application server's password hash. That distinction is important when we come to talking about some things like these attacking words. Golden ticket. These, we're going to talk a little bit about these because they're super important when it comes to if you get specific interview questions or you get something about what's a golden ticket account? What's a silver ticket account? These are really common words to hear when you talk about security of Active Directory, and Kerberos specifically. So the best way I can think of remembering is a golden ticket is just a forged TGT. It's an illegitimate TGT that the attacker is able to create, And if we think about that, we know that a TGT is some data encrypted with the super secret root user in the domain controller's password hash. So the key to this succeeding, you need the password hash of this KRB Kerberos TGT account, which is a service account that's made by default on the Active Directory server. Its specific job is signing, encrypting, and validating tickets. If you're able to get that hash out, if you don't even need the actual password, you just need the hash of it because it uses the hash to encrypt things. If you get that hash, you can take all of this arbitrary data, because this data is known and is in a standard format for creating TGTs. So we can forge all this data, sign it with that hash that we stole, and now we get out a valid TGT that we as an attacker can use to generate any other tickets. That's why it's referred to as a golden ticket. It lets you, when you have access to a golden ticket, you can produce any ticket you want. Because now you can generate TGTs for any account, accounts that don't exist, with all the permissions in the world. And then because everything else implicitly trusts TGTs, all it will do is take the TGT, and when you try to exchange it for that TGS to go on a specific ride, it'll take the TGT and decrypt it with that password hash that we stole, and say, oh, well, the only person who has that password hash is the super secret KRB TGT account, so therefore, because it's decrypted correctly, it must be an authenticated or a real ticket. So that's the most brief and best explanation I came up with for a golden ticket, and it goes into the other big buzzword that comes up a lot in attacking these things, which is silver tickets. So silver tickets, you can imagine, have a relationship to golden tickets in that they are just smaller versions of them. So where a golden ticket is a forged TGT, a silver ticket is a forged TGS. And if we think back to what I said about what a TGS is, the main thing that we care about in a TGS is that it is signed with the password hash of the service, or no, it's signed with the password of the service account. So we are going to need the we're going to need the password hash of that service account, and if we're able to get access to that specific password, we're going to be able to create valid sessions to any specific service that we want using that account, that hash. This one's not as common of an attack as the golden ticket, just because you don't gain as much. Yes?
Question, if you have the password hash and the silver ticket, why don't you also have it for the golden one?
So that is, again, something I was literally looking at before I came here. Because I was like thinking that I'm like, logically, like, what's the difference? And the same thing when I talk about another attack in a second, but the main difference I was able to come to is that TGTs, like I said, are encrypted with the password hash of the, So a silver ticket is you need the password hash of the service account for that specific service. So not for this KRB TGT account. This is the account that is on that would be this password. The password for because all the services have to run under an account. So they're not just running like nebulously with nothing. They're running under a specific account on that server. So creating a silver ticket in a TGS requires the hash of this account, whereas a golden ticket in a TGT requires the account on this one. So yeah, there are situations where you can make TGSs but not make TGTs, and vice versa. However, if you have a TGT, or if you make a golden ticket by stating that password hash, you can make all the TGSs you want, because now you have a signed ticket that you can control whatever data is inside of it.
So basically, like the golden ticket is for all services, while the silver one is just for like one or however many you can get.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, yes. The golden ticket will allow you to create any number of TGSs, because the data that's getting encrypted inside of that TGT contains a lot of stuff about the what service or what permissions you have, what services you can access, that sort of stuff. So if we can just forge that and say we have access to all the services all the time, anything, whatever, and encrypt it, then we can make we can request any TGSs and they'll come out valid. Because we're just going to send it back to that thing and it's going to say, oh, okay, you're good to go. So that's a golden ticket. Golden ticket is much more common than a silver ticket, because with a silver ticket you're really limited to what you can do. It really only allows you to create valid sessions with that one service, and I think the most you can mess with is like who you're requesting it from, so maybe you can get more permissions on a service. Like if you had a valid user that can only access like one share on a file server, with a silver ticket you could change that to so that you have access to anything and do anything on the file server, because you're locked to that local name. So does that make some sense? The main distinction between a silver and a gold ticket. Again, knowing these and saying that a golden ticket's a forged TGT while a silver ticket's a forged TGS is like 90% of the battle. I would hope not. It would seem unfair to me if a question on interview, well, I guess it depends on what you're going for, but I've never been asked anything where it's like, what specific data is stored inside of a TGT, and how does having a password hash of the Kerb TGT account like allow you to access anything. So those are interesting. Those are good. But the biggest thing is Kerberos. So again, the second more specific question I had on my interview was about Kerberos and how it works, what it is, that sort of stuff. So I figured this was a little bit more straightforward and much more common than even golden tickets. This is like, if you get onto a Windows network in an attack, if you're hacking something, if you hopefully have permission to be there, some of the first things you're going to try to do is Kerberos, just because it's so common and easy to do. So with Kerberos, can we do this? Yeah, so if we think back to that analogy of a user, so basically the gist is you asked to write all the rides at once, because if we go back to this, or the fun picture, you can see that we're requesting to ride to the KDC. We're not actually asking the file server. So the KDC doesn't necessarily check if we have access to the ride yet. That happens more in this authentication stuff in the orange back here. So when you're requesting a TGS for a thing, you give it the name of the thing you want to ride and your account. It then puts your account stuff together, signs it, and gives it back to you. And then you send it there, and it does a little bit of authentication to make sure that you actually are belonging, you have access to that specific service. So the key to Kerberos is, hey, if we can request a TGS for every ride, why don't we? So just go around and say, hey, I'm A, I want to go, you'd send a bunch of requests to the KDC, and you say, hey, I want to ride D, and E, and F, and the Ferris wheel one, and the roller coaster. I want to ride all of them. And it's like, whoa, okay, you're an adventurous dude. Got it. And it will send you back TGSs for all of those. Most of them won't be valid because your user, if you're on like a low-level user account, you're not going to have access to all those services. However, it will still send you the TGSs, because then when you send it to the application server, it will do some checks to make sure that there are valid, that you actually have access to those specific services. So with those TGSs, if we request all of the rides, we get all of the tickets. And in those tickets, we're signing those tickets with the password hashes for the service account, right? This bottom, the TGSs, so the TGTs are encrypted with that password, but the TGSs are just signed with this application server. So if we request all of the tickets, we get all the TGSs. Now we can use this super cool program called Mimikatz. I don't know if anybody's heard of Mimikatz. It's like probably the most common tool used it's for memory analysis on, I don't know if it's specifically Windows, but I only ever see it on Windows. So it lets you dive into memory and pull things out of like processes, like the LSAS process for getting domain passwords out. But we use Mimikatz to dig out all the tickets from memory, because Windows doesn't give us access to that like, natively. We pull out all these tickets, and now, because they're just signed, a signature means that we need to know how it was signed and with what data. Well, the signature for all of these things is just the password hash of that service account. So if we request a bunch of TGSs for all of these different services, well, what we're getting is a ticket that part of the data we can read from that ticket is the password hash of a service account. So now we have hashes, and they're offline, so we can just go straight into cracking them, which is what the ending of the Kerberos attack consists of. So we ask to ride a bunch of rides, get a bunch of tickets, extract one piece of information from all those tickets, which is the password hash for those different service accounts, and then we're able to use things like John the Ripper or Hashcat offline on these hashes to try and brute force. That comes back to this, this drawing of taking in some data, so in this case it would be a password, hashing it and getting out this other string that has no correlation with this. If we want to guess passwords with this, we would just put, pass1, throw it in. Does it match? No. All right, pass 2. Does it fit? I don't know. And you do that over and over and over again until you can get out the valid passwords. So that's offline cracking and like the gist of Kerberos. Yes.
So you are able to pull out the password hashes of the service accounts for all the tickets that you've requested.
For all the TGSs, yes.
I'm imagining it is the case, but these passwords are human readable? Like, I'm imagining if these are service accounts, are they not 5 billion character long passwords, all extended ASCII number symbols if humans aren't using them?
Well, so that's another, yeah, all of this attack specifically hinders, relies on these accounts having shitty passwords. Because if they have really, really long, complicated passwords, they're not going to be able to do that. And there are, I don't remember the name of the accounts, I don't remember if they're computer accounts or what, but there are specific accounts in Windows domains that have, Microsoft controls them, they have like 30 character long passwords and they change every like week or 2 or something. I don't remember if it's a computer account or if there's another name for it, but those accounts, you just give up if you get those hashes because you can't crack them. And even if you do, they'll be changed by the time you crack them. These accounts are like, if you were like really bad at setting up an Ubuntu web server and you had it running as root, or if you had it running as like a specific user on the box, that's all the service account is. It's just whatever user is running that service. So it isn't necessarily like the Kerberos TGS or TGT account on there. I think that one's a bit more locked down, but these other ones can be just the administrator is a common one for like bad networks, because if you set up these services to run with those accounts, which I think is, I don't know what the default is, but it's definitely a issue. But the gist from everything I can read is that these are not the accounts that have like ridiculously long passwords. It's whatever the users set them up to be, which is generally bad. And as a double whammy, people forget about these service accounts a lot faster than they do user accounts. So they usually set a password on these, they let them run, and then they don't change it. It's a pain in the ass to change it. And it's really easy to forget if this account's been running this service for like years and years. Like, I've never had any issues with it. Why would I need to change it? Whereas with user accounts, you usually get a prompt that says like, oh, change it every 90 days or something. Yes.
If you have like unlimited access with the tickets already, what's the point of getting passwords?
So if you,
TGTs and TGSs give you all the access you need.
So having a TGT, I guess I should have prefaced this by saying that Kerberos in general is for, or Kerberosting, the attack, is for privilege escalation and lateral movement. It assumes that you already have a user on the network, because to get a TGT, you have to have a valid user account. So you log in with your low privileged user and you have your TGT now. You can request all the TGSs you want. It doesn't mean that you're going to have access to those services. So like if I request a TGS, I might get one for the application server and it's be like, yeah, you have access to that. But I can also get one for the like super cool file sharing ride, and that one I wouldn't have access to just because I'm not in the right group. So just having those TGSs doesn't mean you can actually use them to access the rides, which is why we take the hashes offline and crack them to get access to the user accounts. Because if we have those passwords, we can make new TGSs. We can make our own TGSs to give us access, or we can just log in with those accounts if they have logins. So I guess that's the TGS part. The other thing is I don't want to make it sound like a TGT is a bad thing. It's not like if a user has a TGT, they're an elite hacker who has broken everything. Like every account that logs into an Active Directory domain has a TGT. When you log on, you get your TGT, and that's fine. Because TGTs have permissions. And some of the data that's being encrypted in those TGTs is like, oh, this person can't do this stuff, or they can only have access to this. So just having a TGT isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's when you forge a TGT and make it your own, or you pull out all these hashes and start cracking them. So does that make some sense? Yeah, Nick?
So the TGS, the key to access a file server, for example.
Yeah.
you've been saying it's signed with the password hash of that file server.
Mhm.
From what you've been saying, I feel like is it signed with the password of the file server, and the ticket includes the hash. Because if it's signed with the hash, you should be, if you have the hash, which we pull out of memory, you should be able to create more tickets.
That is something that I was trying to think of because I was realizing that my description of a silver ticket didn't really align with what I was doing in Kerberos. Because Kerberos is something I feel very confident about when it comes to pulling out the password hash from a TGS. I was just looking to see if we covered this at all in the lecture notes I took, because a silver ticket should, or a TGS should be signed with the password hash of that account. And then it must include the password hash because you couldn't check it if, you couldn't check the signature if you didn't have the password hash to like compare, to unencrypt the hash and to check it.
Would the hash be the public key and the password itself be the private key?
It might be, they definitely don't refer to it that way. They definitely, because in Windows land, they definitely don't call it public-private key, but that is a possibility, because it would make more sense if it was signed with the password itself and then the hash was sent. Well, let me see, so that's the end of my prepared slides. This is where I was hoping we would just have conversations, and this is the general vibe for it. So here's another diagram that I came over a couple of times when we were talking about when I was researching and trying to learn about silver tickets. So like it says, silver tickets are just forged TGSs. They avoid any communication with the domain controller, so you don't have to ask the domain controller for anything, you just go straight to sending the TGS, and then it validates it, and then you get the session.
And this is jumping back a little bit, but a successful mini-cats or Kerberosting will give you a silver ticket to a bunch of different services. Am I understanding that correctly?
As far as I know, that would be one of the advantages of it, yes. More obviously, you could also use the passwords to log in if you had, if you had any, you know, because you've broken these hashes now, so you have access to the file server, because
Yeah.
assuming that doesn't work. So that's more obvious, but I think you can also use it, but then it's like, well, I have access to the account that's managing the service, so I don't really need a silver ticket if I can just go do it myself.
No, that's
So.
fair.
So yeah, it says golden tickets are encrypted and signed with the domain Kerberos service account, that KRBTGT account. It's signed with that service account, whereas the silver ticket signed with the service account for that specific service. I couldn't find great.
I will throw out that this is the probably 5th presentation I've had over Kerberosting and how that sort of works. And I feel like I'm just now starting to understand it. So if anyone is confused and a little bit lost.
Yeah, this stuff is like, it's stupid complicated, but I mean, it works okay.
It's what is used.
It's used the
So
most.
that's, we have to put up with it.
Are tickets kind of like JWT tokens where they have like a consistent pattern that you can use? You could almost, you know, just write something yourself and then have it turned into a ticket, adding the hash password at the end.
Yeah, JWTs are very similar, where you have like structured data and then a signature at the end to prove that the data is valid. This is similar where this data has a very specific structure. So when you're forging it, if you have this key, you can make up whatever data you want, and there's documentation on the exact format for those responses. Sign it, and then it's a valid, similar to a JWT. But yeah, so in order to create or forge a silver ticket, the attacker can gain knowledge of password data, password hash for the service account. If the target service account is running under the context of a user account like MSSQL, then the service account password hash is required in order to create silver tickets. See, this is where it's like, there's like, I agree, Nick, there's a bit of a disconnect between like Kerberosting. I know for sure Kerberosting requests TGSs and then pulls the password hashes out. and uses those to crack offline for access. I guess if I had to, maybe you can take the password hashes from those TGSs and you can create silver tickets. However, the goal of Kerberosing isn't to give you more access to that one service. It's to get you either access to new accounts on different computers or higher overall privileges in the domain. So if you, that's the only way I can see this working. I mean, this is just my thought process now. It's just not in my head. But if you pull out the password hash, you'd have two options, right? You could either crack it offline and get the password for that account, or you could create a silver ticket. A silver ticket is going to give you more access to that service, but your access is still going to be limited to that one service. Cracking it offline lets you log in to the account that's administrating that service, which is probably a local admin on another box, which is lateral movement as well as privilege escalation. And I think the goal of that would be cracking it offline would be more beneficial than creating a silver ticket. So those are the only things I can think of, is that in actuality, if you use Kerberos correctly, you could create a TGS, but there isn't a reason to if you can crack it offline, because that would give you way more access. But that is...
But the TGS might be faster, and also if it's like one of those 30-character passwords.
I don't know if I have enough faith in Microsoft for this, but that seems to be a massive security problem. If any user can request the ticket and then can trivially produce a silver ticket attack. So I feel like the password has to be included in.
I'll ask my guy at Microsoft who does blue teaming.
Because I feel very confident in my understanding about Kerberosing. Silver tickets are a bit hazier. Because I mean, Kerberosing is super straightforward, where it's just, it uses traits of Kerberos protocols to harvest password hashes for Active Directory user accounts with service principal name values, i.e. service accounts. A user is allowed to request a TGS ticket for any SPN, and parts of the TGS may be encrypted with some of the RC4 using the password hash of the service account assigned to the requested SPN key. The advisor is able to extract the TGS from memory or capture them by sniffing network traffic, can extract the service account password hash and attempt to offline brute force obtain the password. So then the other thing, we take that definition and combine it with silver ticket Kerberos, all things I've Googled a ton. We'll sort of this site a couple times. So if we look at a silver ticket, what is a silver ticket? A hacker can create a silver ticket by cracking a computer account password and using that to create a fake authentication of their Kerberos. So this makes it sound like they're cracking the actual hash offline and then using the password to generate the ticket. So I could have been off when I said the TGS is encrypted with the password hash, and it's actually encrypted with the password.
That would also just be significantly more secure, because I'm thinking of this from a public-private key standpoint. And if you included your private key in the messages you signed, it is pointless to have signed those messages. Out of curiosity, how many people got completely lost in the presentation?
Just remember, it's like an amusement park. That's literally like the biggest takeaway. If you can go through, if you can walk through that amusement park analogy, like
That was way less
people are gonna be super impressed. That's walking through the amusement park analogy and then knowing what a TGT is versus a TGS, and that one of them is like just you get for being a user on the account, and the other one is for accessing one service. Like those are two massive pieces of knowledge that I feel like will help you in like any number of technical interviews.
do nothing. Like, as a club, we are not associated. Way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, Ice Age, the group that puts on the CBC, and IASG were pretty closely linked. Like, I get the feeling that they were essentially the same organization. Ice Age people being paid for the stuff they do, and IASG people being the, volunteer club that everyone can join. Now, I don't think anyone in here works for Ice Age. When I first started coming to IASG, it wasn't uncommon for like 20% of the people to be like working for Ice Age that come to IASG. So like I feel like we basically completely separated at this point. But it's, so yes, but no, like, our treasurer is still technically with Ice Age, but he never shows up, because our accounts are mixed in a weird and super dumb way. So, it's one of those sort of, from history, sort of related, but not anymore.
So that's one thing.
I think we were also, get some people to help with that, the introductory one, but
Yeah, so we were asked for some of the people who know what they're doing, if they were willing to sort of provide mentorship to new teams. So maybe we'll be doing that. I don't know, like nothing official has happened. Providing mentorship for the CDC. We were asked to do that. Yeah.
Because like that's like right after.
No.
No, it's during break.
That is not during.
No.
it is not during break.
No, never mind. Yeah.
It's the weekend of after.
So it's the weekend of Dead, right before Dead Week.
Yes. It's the weekend
Jesus
before that.
Christ. I should make sure.
That's like 2 weeks and like right at the end of the semester.
Yeah, I should make sure Doug goes away with that.
I think it's originally a community college. So that's, you kind of shoehorn in after the date.
No, here's what it is it's normally the community college one, and they open, and it's normally an easier community college focused one. They do it every year. And they're just opening this up to ISU students because they want bodies in the field. As if there's only like 3 or 4 community colleges, which I think
There
is
was
the case.
also for attendance, the ISU one too, that too.
Yeah.
Just general, not a lot of people showing up for things.
They're trying to kickstart it again because the pandemic has kind of wrecked participation in the CDC.
Yeah, but they're usually like that room filled. There was a lot of tables set up in that room for the CDC. And there was like,
It is.
there were 6 that did that. We got that.
Yeah.
So this is a TPS
Yeah.
assignment.
So in past years, that room has sometimes been like completely counted.
Yeah.
Um,
It was that.
no, it was not.
I also know one team, because I worked with him, he said that like they set it all up like the night before,
Uh-huh.
and then they were done, and they didn't think they had to stay there and like do the like the mandatory things, so they just kind of left it, and then they were like removed when they wiped all the team stuff, right? But they had it like all the way set up.
Rip.
So they didn't do the heartbeat anomaly?
Right.
That's right.
They didn't do the first ones, and they just didn't do like the anomalies, so they were taken out. Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Because that was
A lot of work.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know what the great part of security is? We don't need to know this shit. Like, it's really good to know this, but also, like, there's a reason that it's like a 6 big script is, because no one expects you to know this, like, offhand.
There is.
All of this.
Security is great and terrible in the fact that you kind of need to know a little bit of everything, but there's also nothing you have to know.
It's a little bit of everything, not like master.
And it's really good to get a master 1 or 2 particular things. But it's like you have to know everything at once to like an intermediate level, which is terrible.
Honestly, I feel like that's better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you noticed it in this town with,
Cause like,
So
then
we're-
you just understand things at like a higher level.
Yeah.
So
you kind of noticed it in this.
are you in 2:30 right now?
Yeah.
What did she talk about Thursday? 'Cause I was sick and wasn't there.
Okay, what happened Thursday? I'm gonna need the 6 slides and then I can, did she post the slide thing? Did she post the slide?
I don't know.
Did you not look
She
at
does?
this?
I don't know.
She
I was
does.
focused on not dying.
Wait, is she not post?
Not after this.
I think,
Okay, she did say that.
Okay, she was this like way too fast to like balance actually. They're completely filled with words. And then she talks about them so fast.
Yeah, so-
I'm like,
So this is
Holy
that's not
shit.
session, but the session comes from.
yeah, I don't
about
know.
people not, about the way they're interacting with the kids.
That's very
People will post questions at like
11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
11 p.m. at night, and it's like, it has no
I need the TA's like, can I use that page? I'm like, oh,
I don't know what you
Session.
Yeah, so Julie's about that. And I would not be surprised.
I was gonna say, no, don't report it.
We should.
Don't have the TA go, can you help me at 11:52 p.m.? Just be like,
So
ask
I'm
the question.
trying,
I don't know.
so I'm not involved in this,
Yeah.
so I don't have much to say in anything,
Sure.
but I've talked
It
to
was just hard
TAs,
Bro, you can see like
That one.
Yeah, just to
Um,
see who shows up.
and I've been trying to like poker be like,
On Monday, just be like.
don't punish everyone for the idiots.
I used to sit in the front, just fire and
Because
ask
like,
for questions.
one thing they're talking about is, if you're not there for like a whole lab, you just don't get to do that lab, you're just don't get to try.
Yeah, she did, she literally said that in the Slack.
I feel like we should probably discuss things like.
Yeah, well, here's the thing.
Like, some of them,
You know what's frustrating? So I was sick.
Yeah.
You don't. You don't, but people do.
Some people do, and they should be going.
But they don't.
Maybe they.
But the thing is the people
I don't have.
go and know whether or not they need to go are going to get a good
I was like,
grade.
oh, Julie.
You will get a good grade in the lab, because you know what you need help with and
I
you go
will
to lab.
make my lab.
Oh,
Do?
yeah.
And then like the last few labs, she's like,
Oh, yeah, I'll
oh,
leave
it's
it.
starting to get a little bit more.
That's my taste. She was like, you just didn't show up. I was like,
Yeah.
swear to
And when I was in it,
Because
I don't treat
swear
my,
stayed in the class.
my body
No, I was like, I
that
swear.
well. It's a
I showed you that
problem. So
I
just,
swear
like,
I told
won't
Julie that I was
sometimes.
sick.
And
I
I
got
would
the
hit,
letter
like,
saying
my
she
mom would
emailed
hit
you,
me
and then
in
she
the middle of
did not
lab,
email
and I'd be
you.
like, you know what? I'm just gonna not do
Like,
anything
I
for the
don't know
next
what
hour if I don't
word to
get
do
food.
You're not allowed to ask her.
So I would leave, and then I would do the lab.
Then now that you know that you saw the
But, like,
message
if
from
I had to
Julie,
sit
go
there,
yeah. Yes,
literally
he's
no
actually
work.
sick.
Yeah, she's been.
Because my body wasn't like prepared to do mental work at that point in time.
That's fair.
There's been a
Um,
lot.
I believe
I've
that.
been getting the feeling that she's.
But like, I had to stay there, I don't know. It's,
No.
it's very frustrating.
She's not usually like this.
My suggestion was, if
She-
you're
she
there
was
for a
mad
lot of
about
lab,
2% of the classified ideas. And that's even an
But
overestimate.
if she doesn't like post her slides.
if you're not there for the lab,
She just kind of.
you don't get access to the support
And there's a
channel.
lot of stuff on there.
Seems like maybe
Picture.
get better at listening
Yeah.
to things.
Picture.
But you can't
Picture.
that fast.
I can't.
Picture.
Well, I mean, you're.
Picture.
I don't know.
Picture.
I had to step back from literally not being able to turn in the lab if you don't show up. Which is what she wants to do now.
Write down the topics and then do your own research. Or you can do textbook.
Like the message type.
Or.
We don't have textbooks.
You need to stop.
We don't have textbooks, I'd like to point out. No, they're suggested readings.
Ah.
That's not a textbook.
They are technically required, so people on financial aid can use their financial aid to get them.
So we should be able to fit everyone.
Yeah, but some people want hardcover. So like if you put, so apparently,
We should be able to
Yeah.
fit everyone.
so that's why they put them required, because if they're suggested, you can't use scholarship money on them, or financial aid, or, you know, there's more restrictions for required ones. Yeah. Yeah, so actually,
What percent of our grade is like on the homework? Sorry.
This sounds.
Oh, well, the last homework 13, the
Yeah.
next one, it's worth 40 points and that's
I need a
straight
second
credit.
one.
So
Really?
if you
Really?
do two of them, you can
Really?
serve a
Huh?
20%.
So I might not just do this one.
I
I might not do 11.
It's actually not that hard.
wait, what?
It's
way.
I can't figure out how many even the two
Yeah.
windows ones.
Sorry, you said dude
It's
and
like an upper-
No, it's the one that's
Oh,
due
it's
tomorrow,
right
but
there.
like.
Okay.
So,
I was like,
Felt my red.
maybe glue a Christmas tree.
Oh, yeah, that would.
An entire tree, no one patch.
Mine was actually
Might have to like add some support straps.
Yeah.
Okay, but no one would be able to see me, and that's one of my goals in life.
He told me to change it so the turn says it's right, but then it doesn't. So mine doesn't work with the turn.
Things like what?
Or you can have it.
I didn't know that.
I saw your breakdown of this is what's right
I've done it.
Yeah.
This
I
is
got
just
the regular speakers.
this.
Yeah, so after we get the
Yes, I've done that. They have IP addresses.
contains our username.
And
This
Wolfe
stuff
is
is
in
access
about
to
to
pretty
get
much the
pictures.
session key.
So,
And then this is
gonna-
the GPS sheet that's supposed to be just for
You work with computers.
Which we don't have.
What the hell? Okay, I literally just clicked on that. That is what I just clicked on. And now, I swear to God, they show someone it works.
the same
They show someone, I
It's not related to that scholarship.
Yeah.
It happened to get right. It wasn't working. It showed someone and it immediately starts working.
Okay.
No, it wasn't you, it was him.
computers in which service should be executed, however, the computer path logs are complete, that's our second method, that's super long.
Oh, are you gonna get 2 3 1
in the lab that you
No, I mean,
And
that's.
that makes sense, so.
That wasn't my fault.
I know you're in the lab right before because you stayed in the lab.
Yeah.
This is, yeah, on the lab section, so I can feel that entire lab section.
Because that other block, which makes it sound like if you successfully do Kerberos and then get a password back, then if you just hash it, then you have this documentation. So, which implies that we don't have a password hash here, we have something like adjacent.
Oh, software engineers?
Which sounds like what this is doing, the session key. So if you know that.
At least you acknowledge it.
We were ready.
Oh, I don't know when you
In
were
my
cracking
head,
on,
you have
you know,
something like
like
this where you
comp
have
sci majors
this.
almost
Oh,
2
we
laps
are.
ago.
We are.
I would too.
Yeah, honestly.
I'm in the 7:45 Wednesday lab.
Yo, me too.
Lab section 3.
Then.
Working so early.
It'll be fine.
Here for a silver ticket.
They shouldn't allow classes that early. That's a crime.
Is that
Let's day.
Yeah, that's
That's
that you need Wednesday, you can verify.
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
didn't know how
I can't do that later one because it will run in my,
So it's got two
last
different
hashtags.
It's got the ticket hash.
You're going to
and
teen or
the second part is.
Yeah, when you go to Ames campus, you have to take HQ. It is dramatically easier to hear everything
So
online.
like
They just have like,
We're cracking it off.
yeah, I tried that this semester. I had a 30% on the first exam.
So I feel like.
Got a pen. Yeah.
Maybe Catherine did something to get it.
Well,
And if it's.
no, honestly, it's because of the engineering. I should go side, like the engineering.
It's never
computer
one.
one.
It's not really switch. It's never switch.
It's not
I'm probably gonna go to.
It's
Well, yeah, because you take all the classes.
Well, yeah.
And then I have to go back through like.
I don't know what I'm gonna do tonight. I'm probably gonna work on.
Yeah.
Ben might join us, he's gonna be working
Well-
at 2:30.
Goodbye.
Like-
You guys
And
want to
it's
do that now?
really
I'm
strict.
bad.
Like,
Well,
we're
if
going.
you like engineering
Yeah.
101, you're
What's your name
probably-
again?
Nicholas.
No,
Nicholas,
that'd be
okay.
Did you, intern in
No,
art?
I thought you got
You-
I got that.
the wires for.
Did you guys ever do
No.
any?
All the like 101 classes, they wait for.
I interned during
Deep
the
dive into Kerberos.
Like,
But do they do physical?
Yeah, they
previous
do.
interns have done them.
That's why I've been trying to get after RSM. You're amazing, we need you, I
yeah,
reply.
they all are.
They are.
Just like immediately never answer.
So I have never had good luck with HR.
I literally, oh, I don't know, like,
That was like, I mean, obviously,
oh, you already applied, let me go check up on that for you.
Really.
You want to do
I'd
physical?
like to do physical.
Were you interned with Jack?
And it's not really worth it.
I feel like Jack last
Like,
week.
as long as you take like.
Maybe not last
like,
week,
internship,
but the week before.
that's all.
But one of our previous
The
presentations.
pizza?
I don't think he brought it. So he
I'm not
talked
into
about
security, but-
physical testing, breaking in places,
Yeah, and then like apparently.
Okay.
I went to the bar a couple like
Yeah,
days ago.
no judgment or anything, so go and find, so, hey Trent,
What do you like?
is Jack in the YouTube channel?
Which one?
The physical security one?
No, that'll be out. I have like to do 4 weeks now in a row straight.
Okay,
I'm way behind.
I wonder if you
The plan's either today or tomorrow.
I would assume they do. So, once Trent picks it up, I'm assuming